I moved into my quiet suburban neighborhood 3 years ago, specifically choosing the corner lot because it offered privacy and a generous side yard perfect for my home office setup. The previous owners had installed a detached studio structure that I converted into my workspace, complete with high-end computer equipment for my consulting business. Everything was perfect until the Hendersons moved in next door. Well, specifically, until Karen Henderson made her presence known. The first week was quiet enough. I saw them moving in, offered a friendly wave, even brought over some homemade cookies as a welcome gesture. Karen answered the door, looked at the cookies like I had handed her a plate of insects, and said, "Thank you, but we don't eat processed sugar or anything from unknown kitchens. You understand, I'm sure." She closed the door before I could mention that I had made them myself that morning. I should have recognized this as the warning sign it was. The second week, things got interesting. I was working in my studio when Karen knocked on my door. Not my house door. My studio door, which was clearly separate from the main house and located in my backyard. I opened it to find her standing there with a measuring tape and a notebook. "I need to document something," she announced, pushing past me into my private workspace. "Your studio is exactly 3 inches closer to the property line than the zoning allows." I measured. 3 inches. Do you know what that means? Before I could respond to this absolutely bonkers accusation about my legally permitted structure that had been there for 8 years before she arrived, Karen began taking photographs of my workspace, including my computer screens, my personal documents on the desk, and even the inside of my mini fridge. I firmly asked her to leave, which she did, but not before saying, "You'll be hearing from the HOA about this. And probably the city. This is a violation, and I don't tolerate violations in my neighborhood." If you're enjoying this story of entitled behavior, please hit that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more tales of Karens getting exactly what they deserve. Trust me, this one gets good. Now, Karen's claim about my studio was completely false. I had all the permits, all the documentation, and the structure had been inspected and approved years ago. But that didn't stop her from filing complaints. First with the HOA, which dismissed it immediately after I showed them my paperwork. Then with the city zoning board, which sent an inspector who confirmed everything was perfectly legal, and told me off the record that Karen had been extremely rude to him on the phone. Then she tried the county, then she attempted to organize a petition among the neighbors, which failed because everyone else on the street thought she was unhinged. But Karen wasn't done. Not even close. When official channels failed her, she escalated to personal harassment. She began documenting every time I came and went from my house. She took photographs of my car in my own driveway, claiming I was parking, in a manner that suggested aggression toward her property. She filed noise complaints about my air conditioning unit, which was installed to code and no louder than anyone else's. She called the police when I had friends over for dinner, claiming we were running an illegal business out of my home. The officers were apologetic and told me they had to respond to calls, but that I wasn't doing anything wrong. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was working in my studio, on a video call with a client in Singapore, when my power suddenly cut out. Everything went dark. My computers died mid-sentence, my internet went down, and I lost the call along with nearly an hour of unsaved work. I assumed it was a neighborhood outage and went to check my breaker box, which was located on the outside wall of my studio. That's when I noticed something strange. The metal panel door of my breaker box was slightly ajar, which was unusual because I always kept it secured. But more concerning was what I saw when I opened it fully. Someone had physically flipped my main breaker to the off position. This wasn't an electrical fault or a power surge. Someone had deliberately cut my power. And given that the breaker box was located on the side of my studio facing Karen's property, hidden from street view by a fence, there was really only one person who could have accessed it easily. I flipped the breaker back on, and my equipment hummed back to life. I had to send apology emails to my client and reschedule our meeting. Then I did what I should have done weeks ago. I installed security cameras. Not just one or two, but a comprehensive system with 8 high-definition cameras covering every angle of my property, including 2 focused specifically on the area around my studio and breaker box. The cameras had night vision, motion detection, and cloud backup. They weren't cheap, but my consulting work paid extremely well, and I believed in investing in quality solutions. For 3 days, nothing unusual happened. Then, at 2:30 in the morning on a Friday night, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera watching my breaker box. I opened the app, and there, illuminated in crisp infrared clarity, was Karen Henderson. She was dressed in dark clothing, creeping along the side of my studio. I watched in real time as she approached my breaker box, opened the panel, and flipped my main breaker to the off position. She then did something I didn't expect. She pulled out what looked like a heavy-duty extension cord from a bag she was carrying, and she plugged it into an outdoor outlet on the side of my studio. My studio had 2 exterior outlets, installed by the previous owners for yard work equipment. I rarely used them, but they were there, connected to my electrical system. Karen plugged her extension cord into one of these outlets, then carefully ran the cord back across the property line into her own yard, where it disappeared into her garage through a side door she had left propped open. I sat there in my bed, watching this unfold on my phone, genuinely stunned. Karen Henderson wasn't just harassing me anymore. She was stealing electricity from me. She had cut my power to force me to go check the breaker, probably hoping I would assume it was a malfunction, and then she was using my outdoor outlet to power something in her garage. The audacity was breathtaking. I could have confronted her right then. I could have gone outside and caught her in the act. But something told me to wait. To watch. To document everything. So I started screen recording the camera footage and went back to sleep, making sure my phone would alert me to any further motion. Over the next 2 weeks, I discovered the full extent of Karen's operation. Every night, around 2 or 2:30 in the morning, she would creep over to my property, flip my main breaker off, and plug in her extension cord. She was powering something substantial, because my electricity bill, which I checked obsessively now, had jumped by nearly 40%. Whatever she was running, it was drawing serious power. I did some detective work. During daylight hours, I casually walked past her property during my morning runs, changing my route slightly to pass by her garage windows. That's when I saw it. Karen had set up an elaborate indoor growing operation in her garage. Not for anything illegal, mind you, but for high-end orchids. Apparently, she had decided to start an orchid breeding business, and those operations require substantial climate control, specialized lighting, and humidity systems that run 24 hours a day. All of which consume enormous amounts of electricity. Rather than pay for the electrical upgrades her garage would need, or deal with the increase in her own power bill, Karen had decided to simply steal electricity from her neighbor. From me. She was probably justifying it to herself as somehow fair, given her delusional belief that my studio was violating some imaginary zoning rule. I consulted with my lawyer, a college friend named Marcus who specialized in property law and had a particular fondness for creative legal solutions. I showed him all the footage, the timestamps, the documentation of my increased electrical bills, everything. Marcus watched the videos with an expression of pure delight. "This is," he said, "the most clear-cut case of theft of utilities I have ever seen. Like, she might as well have robbed a bank with her driver's license taped to her forehead. You could have her arrested right now." "What are my options?" I asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair, that calculating look in his eyes that I had seen back in college when he was about to pull off something brilliant. "Well, the straightforward option is to call the police, show them the footage, and press charges. Theft of utilities is a serious crime. Depending on the amount, it could be a misdemeanor or even a felony. She would definitely face charges, probably have to pay restitution, maybe even jail time." "And the not straightforward option?" I asked. Marcus grinned. "How much do you hate this woman?" "She has made my life miserable for 3 months," I said. "She has invaded my privacy, harassed me, filed false complaints, and is now literally stealing from me. I would very much like her to experience consequences that match the scale of her entitlement." Then let's get creative, Marcus said. But first, we need to let her dig this hole a bit deeper. So we waited. For another full month, I let Karen continue her nightly routine. Every single incident was captured in perfect high definition. I documented everything. I kept detailed records of my electrical bills, calculating the exact amount she was stealing. I had Marcus research the property records, the HOA bylaws, and every relevant local ordinance. And then we discovered something interesting. The HOA rules, which Karen loved to quote selectively, had very specific language about theft and illegal activity on HOA properties. Any homeowner found guilty of stealing from another homeowner could face immediate fines, mandatory restitution, and in extreme cases, forced sale of their property by the HOA board. It was a nuclear option that had never been used in the neighborhood's 20-year history, but it was there in the bylaws, clear as day. Even better, I discovered through my research and some discreet conversations with other neighbors that Karen had been making herself deeply unpopular throughout the community. She had filed complaints against 7 different households for various imaginary infractions. She had tried to get the HOA to ban children from playing in the street. She had attempted to institute a rule requiring pre-approval for any guests staying overnight at anyone's house. The neighborhood was sick of her, but she was technically following the rules with her complaints, so the HOA couldn't do anything about it. Until now. Marcus and I prepared our case with the thoroughness of prosecutors going after a cartel. We compiled every second of footage, every receipt, every documentation of harassment. We calculated that Karen had stolen approximately $800 worth of electricity from me over the 2-month period. Not a fortune, but definitely enough to elevate this beyond a minor offense. Then, on a crisp November morning, we made our move. Marcus and I invited the entire HOA board to my house for a special presentation. All 7 board members showed up, curious about what could be so urgent. I had prepared a full multimedia presentation, which I displayed on my large monitor in my studio, the very studio Karen had claimed was illegally positioned. I walked them through everything. The timeline of harassment. The false complaints. And then, the grand finale, I played the security footage. 2 months' worth of nightly theft, edited down to a devastating 15-minute compilation. You could see everything. Karen's face clearly visible in the infrared. Her deliberately cutting my power. Her plugging into my outlet. Her running the extension cord to her garage. Everything. The board members sat in stunned silence. The HOA president, a retired accountant named Dorothy, kept saying, "Oh my God," under her breath. When the video ended, Dorothy looked at me and said, "Do you have copies of all of this?" "Multiple backups," I confirmed. Along with documentation of the increased electrical bills, timestamps for every incident, and a full legal analysis prepared by my attorney. "This is theft," Dorothy said flatly. "Clear, undeniable theft. She's been stealing from you for months. This is," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "this is exactly the kind of egregious behavior the extreme enforcement clause was written for." "I want to press criminal charges," I said. "And I want the HOA to enforce every applicable rule and consequence." The board voted unanimously, right there in my studio, to pursue the maximum penalties available under the bylaws. Then Marcus and I went to the police station, where we filed a formal criminal complaint for theft of utilities. The detective who took our statement watched the footage and actually laughed. "I've been doing this job for 19 years, he said, "and I have never seen someone document their own crime this thoroughly." "She knew you had cameras?" "She did not," I said. "I installed them after the first time she cut my power, but they're small and discreet. She never noticed." "Beautiful," the detective said, and he really meant it. The police moved quickly. Theft of utilities over $500 was a felony in our state. They obtained a warrant, and 3 days later, on a bright Saturday morning when the whole neighborhood was out doing yard work, 2 police cars pulled up to Karen Henderson's house. I happened to be outside trimming my hedges when the officers knocked on her door. Karen answered, saw the police, and immediately went into her characteristic aggressive mode. I couldn't hear everything, but her voice carried. This is harassment. I know my rights. What is this about? I demand to speak to your supervisor. The officers remained calm and professional, explaining that they had a warrant to search her garage and that she was being investigated for theft of utilities. Karen's face went through an interesting series of expressions. Confusion, then indignation, then something that might have been fear. That's ridiculous. I haven't stolen anything. This is obviously that crazy neighbor of mine making false accusations. He's been harassing me for months. That's when one of the officers held up a tablet showing a still image from my security footage. Even from my yard, I could see the moment Karen recognized herself in the photo. Her face went pale, then red, then a sort of grayish-white that suggested her brain was fully processing the implications. The officers spent an hour in her garage. They photographed everything. The elaborate orchid setup, the extension cord still plugged in and running across to my property, all of it. They confiscated the cord as evidence. They took detailed statements. And then, right there in her driveway, with at least a dozen neighbors watching, they arrested Karen Henderson for felony theft of utilities. The handcuffs seemed to break something in Karen's entitled worldview. She started screaming, not the angry, aggressive screaming she usually did, but panicked, desperate screaming. You can't do this. I'm a homeowner. I'm a valued member of this community. This is a mistake. He probably gave me permission and forgot. This is entrapment. I want my lawyer. The officers read her rights and placed her in the back of the patrol car. As they drove away, I noticed at least 15 neighbors standing in their yards or looking out their windows, watching the whole scene unfold. A few of them caught my eye and nodded with expressions that clearly said, "About damn time." But the arrest was only the beginning. Marcus had been very thorough in exploring every possible legal avenue, and he had discovered something delicious in the property records. Karen and her husband didn't own their house outright. They had a substantial mortgage, and buried in their mortgage agreement was a standard clause that the lender could call the loan if the property was used for illegal activities. Normally, this clause was intended for situations like running a drug operation or illegal gambling. But theft is theft, and Marcus made sure the mortgage company was fully informed of the criminal charges. The HOA moved forward with their enforcement actions simultaneously. Karen was fined $10,000 for theft from another homeowner, the maximum penalty under the bylaws. She was also issued formal violations for her illegal electrical usage, for the unpermitted commercial activity in her garage, because yes, her orchid breeding business was technically a commercial operation that she had never disclosed or gotten approval for, and for creating a hostile environment for other residents through her pattern of harassment. The HOA's lawyer, who Marcus knew professionally and who was absolutely delighted by this case, sent a formal letter outlining all violations and penalties. The letter included a clause stating that if the fines were not paid within 30 days, the HOA would pursue forced sale of the property, as allowed under the extreme enforcement provisions. Karen had 30 days to come up with $10,000, plus legal fees, plus whatever her criminal defense was going to cost. But here's where my particular background became relevant. I hadn't mentioned this to Karen, obviously, but my consulting business was extremely successful. I specialized in helping companies optimize their operations and reduce costs, and I had clients across 3 continents. I had done very well for myself, well enough that I had significant liquid capital and a portfolio of investment properties. When Marcus mentioned that Karen's house would likely end up in forced sale if she couldn't pay the fines, and that her mortgage company might accelerate the loan due to the criminal charges, I had an idea. A beautiful, perfect, completely legal idea. What if I bought the house? I asked Marcus. He stared at me. You want to buy your terrible neighbor's house? I want to own the property next to mine, I clarified. Think about it. If the HOA forces the sale, it will likely go to auction. If her mortgage company forecloses, same thing. Either way, that house is going on the market under distressed circumstances. I can make sure I'm the highest bidder. Then I control what happens to the property. I could rent it out to carefully vetted tenants. I could use it for storage. I could bulldoze the entire thing and turn it into a garden. Whatever I want. Marcus got that gleam in his eye again. That's evil. I love it. Let me make some calls. Over the next 3 weeks, everything fell into place like dominoes. Karen's criminal trial was scheduled. Her lawyer tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, that she didn't realize she was doing anything wrong, but the video evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutor offered a plea deal: plead guilty to a reduced misdemeanor charge, pay full restitution plus penalties, and accept 2 years probation. The alternative was going to trial on felony charges with video evidence that would take about 30 seconds for a jury to convict on. Karen took the plea deal. She had no choice. But the restitution, combined with her criminal defense costs, combined with the HOA fines, combined with her mortgage payments, was more than she could handle. The HOA moved forward with forced sale procedures. Her mortgage company, seeing the writing on the wall, began foreclosure proceedings. Marcus helped me set up a real estate investment LLC to keep my name initially out of the public records. When Karen's house went to auction 6 weeks after her arrest, my LLC was ready. There were a few other bidders, mostly house flippers looking for a deal, but I had authorized Marcus to go up to significantly above market value if necessary. It wasn't necessary. The house sold to my LLC for $15,000 over the remaining mortgage balance, which was actually below market value for the neighborhood but above what the other bidders were willing to pay for a distressed sale. The best part, the absolutely perfect detail, was that Karen didn't know I was the buyer until the closing paperwork was filed. She had already moved out, forced out by the foreclosure, and had relocated to an apartment across town. The public records showed the LLC as the buyer, and it took about a week for the ownership information to be fully processed and available. I was in my studio, working on a project, when I saw Karen's car pull up in front of what used to be her house. She got out, walked up to the mailbox, probably trying to collect any forwarded mail. That's when she saw me in my yard. Our eyes met across the property line. I gave her a friendly wave, the same kind of wave I had given her on the day she moved in. Karen stared at me, confused. Then she looked at the house, then back at me. I could see her brain working, trying to figure out why I was being friendly, trying to understand what was happening. That's when the contractor's truck pulled up. I had hired a landscaping company to start work on converting her former property into what I wanted, which was an extended garden space and possibly a guest house eventually. The contractor got out, walked over to me, and in a voice that absolutely carried across both yards said, "Mr. Chin, we're ready to start work on your new property. Do you want us to start with removing the garage like you specified?" I watched Karen's face as the realization hit her. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Her expression went from confusion, to understanding, to absolute horror. Her mouth opened and closed several times. She looked at the house, then at me, then at the contractor, then back at the house. Her hand came up to her mouth. She actually staggered backward a step. "You," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper but shrill with shock. "You bought my house?" I gave her my best professional smile, the one I used in client meetings. "I bought this house, yes. Through a competitive bidding process. All completely legal and above board. The property needed a new owner, and I needed more space. It worked out perfectly." Karen's face cycled through every shade of red and white. You can't, you did this on purpose. You orchestrated this whole thing. You had me arrested so you could steal my house." "I had you arrested?" I kept my voice calm and reasonable. "Karen, I didn't cut my own power and steal my own electricity. That was entirely your choice. I just documented it and reported a crime. Everything that happened after that was simply the natural consequences of your own actions." The contractor, sensing the tension, quietly excused himself and went to wait by his truck. Karen stood there, trembling, staring at the house she had lost, the house I now owned, the house that sat on the very property line she had obsessed over. She opened her mouth to say something else, but nothing came out. What could she say? Every bit of this was legal. Every step had been by the book. She had stolen from me, gotten caught, and the consequences had spiraled exactly as far as the law and the HOA rules allowed them to spiral. I had taken her complaints about my property, her obsession with rules and violations, her entitlement about controlling her neighborhood, and I had used every single bit of it against her. She wanted to control the properties around her. Now I controlled the property that used to be hers. She wanted to weaponize rules and regulations. So I did, perfectly and completely legally. She wanted to make my life difficult over imaginary violations. So I had documented her very real violations and let the system she loved so much do exactly what it was designed to do. Karen stood there for a long moment, and I could see the full scope of her downfall crystallizing in her mind. She had lost her house. She had a criminal record. She owed thousands in restitution and fines. She had been forced to move to a cramped apartment. And the person she had harassed and stolen from now owned her former home and could do whatever he wanted with it. Including, as the contractor had mentioned, tearing down that garage where she had run her little orchid operation powered by my stolen electricity. Her hands were shaking. Her face had gone from red to a sort of gray-white color. She looked at me one more time, and I saw in her eyes the exact moment when she understood that she hadn't just lost this battle. She had lost completely, permanently, and in a way that was specifically tailored from her own actions. Every domino that had fallen had been set up by her own entitled choices, and I had simply documented them and let gravity do its work.